The two brothers accused in the shooting death of Nikia Aldridge, the cousin of Chicago Bull Dwayne Wade, were in court on Monday. Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel calls for criminal justice reform after the mother of four was caught in the crossfire of Chicago's gang wars on the South Side.
I'm looking to solve a problem. You had two guys with easy access to a gun. So the easy access to the guns is part of the solution. Stiffer penalties related to repeat offenders is part of the solution.
The easy access to guns is part of the solution. Let's see what Tim Schmidt has to say about that. Tim is president and founder of U.S. Concealed Carry Association. Tim, welcome to Morning Glory.
Good morning, Brian. Thanks for having me on the show.
There's a Pew Research Center poll that's just released showing 44% of all households in America have a gun. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, yep. The research shows that since 2014, gun ownership has increased by 37.5%, which is pretty amazing. I think we all agree that self-defense is a God-given and natural-born right. And what I'm hearing from my customers is that more and more Americans are discovering that the only path to sustainable violence reduction is responsible gun ownership. Gun control simply does not work. Gun control only keeps the guns out of the hands of the good guys. Gun-free zones do not work. I mean, we see the news every day. These gun-free zones, they simply create ideal soft targets for terrorists and criminals. So, at the USCCA, we focus on education, training, and responsible gun ownership.
Well, Tim, this is Gloria. When you mentioned responsible gun ownership, I'm like, how does that play in when people are already fearful and angry? What would you say responsible gun ownership looks like for people that are taking to buying a gun because they are fearful and angry?
Well, Gloria, that's a great point. And the unfortunate thing is that we can't control what people are going to do. We can't control what free people are going to do. I mean, yes, in the nation of 300 plus million, there will always be people that act out with sin, that act out irrationally. Unless you want to try to control the actions of every single person, the solution isn't to take the freedom away from the majority.
Tim, the poll also showed that 58% of respondents viewed gun ownership as something that brings safety versus 37% who believe that it increases risk. How does this chart with where we've been, say, 30 years ago and even 10 years ago?
In terms of the people that perceive gun ownership to provide safety versus risk, that's actually going back in the direction of people understanding that firearms are simply a tool that ultimately do provide safety. A lot of that negative perception of gun ownership came from some research that was done, I think it was back in 1993 by Dr. Arthur Kellerman, and he talked about how he claimed that there was a study that by just simply having a gun in your home, it doubled the chance of that gun being used against you, which turned out to be completely false. If you use the methodology that Dr. Kellerman used, you could prove that since diabetics are much more likely to possess insulin than non-diabetics, that the possession of insulin is a risk factor for diabetes, which of course is crazy. So the good news, though, is that people are understanding that a firearm is simply a tool. It's the ultimate force equalizer.
And how aware are people today of the Second Amendment?
Oh, boy, the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was simply our founding fathers affirming the natural-born and God-given right to self-defense. The Second Amendment doesn't give us any rights at all. It's simply an affirmation of like I said before, it's a God-given natural-born right. And you can live in a country where people either acknowledge that natural-born God-given freedom or they don't. I personally believe that our country is heading back to the area of our original founders, that people are recognizing that, yes, the Second Amendment affirms an important right.
Tim, I've been doing news for 4 decades. Yeah, I know I'm old. But I've had so many stories of kids finding a loaded gun in the house and dying as a result of that, or shooting one of their siblings. Can you clarify for gun owners what we need to do to protect our children?
Oh, yes. And I hear those stories and they break my heart. And the funny thing is, though, is if you look at the data, if you look at the facts, more children die in swimming pool accidents more children die in car crashes than they do firearms.
Of course.
And so it's important to keep things in balance. And that's really one of the core things that we focus on at the USCCA is responsible gun ownership. It's teaching your children about firearms and about their power, so that those horrible accidents don't occur.
All right, Tim Schmidt, president and co-founder of U.S. Concealed Carry Association. We appreciate you joining us this morning.
Morning Glory Sports.
20 till with Jack.